A very warm welcome to our session here. We're excited to have you joining us in SkillsFuture Month at SIT. I'm Mahira, an undergraduate student from SIT. I'll be your student host for this session. The title of this session is Are We Sleepwalking into a Crisis We Can't Afford? Climate Risks. We are honored to have our speaker from SMU, Ms. Helene Lee, who will be speaking to us. Ms. Helene Lee is a known influencer and key opinion leader in fintech and digital transformation, recognized by Thomson Reuters Refinitiv as top 5 in Asia Pacific and globally a top 2 influencer in sustainable finance. She is co-founder of Go Impact Capital Partners, a platform developed to accelerate the mainstreaming of sustainable investments. The session will be moderated by Mr. Kerry Chan. Without further ado, let us welcome our speaker, Ms. Helene Lee and Mr. Kerry Chan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahira. As introduced by Mahira earlier on, my name is Kerry Chan. I'm actually the Deputy Director at the SMU Academy. Now, how this all came about, we thought that it's very important to actually look into some of the sustainability and ESG issues that is actually affecting the world. We are proud to actually work with Go Impact on a certificate in impact investing and megatrends in sustainability. Why? Because businesses these days are caught with a higher purpose to minimize negative impact on Earth and contribute to measurable positive social, economic, and environmental impact, along with financial returns, of course. Thrive takes on a new meaning in consideration of using the Earth's resources. Thus, sustainability is not simply confined to environmentally friendly products and carbon footprint, but a proactive movement for businesses to re-evaluate their decisions without harming the Earth by creating impact investment. In this particular program, business owners and decision makers will understand how the economy and the environment are highly intertwined and the importance of the action and consequences. Participants in this program will also learn on the tangibility of promoting social and environmental impact on how investors should capitalize accordingly. So this morning, I'm actually very happy to have invited the founder or the co-founder of Go Impact Capital Partners and also the general manager of FinTech Association of Hong Kong, Ms. Helene Lee, to present a talk on Are We Sleepwalking into a Crisis We Can't Afford? Climate Risk. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on Helene. And of course, you may leave your questions at the end, and we would certainly encourage you to ask questions as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Really delighted to be here. I would like to just
Helene,
swing right in.
Can you bring to your PowerPoint screen as the first screen? Yeah, thank you. And make it full screen, please.
Of course. I would just like to, thank everyone for joining this. It's as Carrie was, introducing, it's very important actually for us to look at sustainability and ESG investments, not just as a conference agenda. There's no lack of conferences that talks about that. Not just as a PR agenda. It's not just 2 pages in your annual report that you comply with the regulatory demands. It's a business agenda. It's an investment agenda, and it's a very urgent agenda. So how do we actually move from, it being, from the conference agenda to a business agenda, from a PR agenda to an investment agenda, that we really need to bridge that learning gap. And that learning gap is something that myself and Go Impact are very proud and honored to work with a lot of stakeholders like SMU on this. So, without further ado, let me just walk you through a couple of slides as to what climate risk pose, and are we actually sleepwalking into a crisis we can't afford? Why this must be a business and investment agenda sooner rather than later, and definitely before it's too late. If you look at the atmospheric carbon dioxide and the Earth's surface temperatures between the last century and just 2020, it has increased so much that it's hit a new high year on year. That curve speaks for itself. And I think that goes to the point about, the Paris Accord and other, climate risk frameworks that we have noticed. We are not doing enough to contain that. We are not doing enough to limit the warming of the atmosphere and the emission of carbon dioxide. If we look at this, the Paris Accord, we need to limit it to no more than 2 degrees. But if actually we are on track to reach a 3 degrees or more in terms of global warming by the end of the century, the 4 lovely pictures here of our planet Earth shows that with 1.5 degrees, that is roughly the change in average temperature of the hottest days. It's still livable, quote unquote. With 2 degrees, certain areas, particularly like in sub-Saharan Africa, certain parts of the United States that are landlocked, certain parts of Australia that are landlocked, and China as well, would be very difficult and challenging, and the use of energy would just skyrocket. So, if we are on track to reach a 3 degrees or more, I'm not sure there is a safe place on Earth. There is actually recently a top line cover article at The Economist that for anyone who's interested, it's called A 3 Degrees World Would Have No Safe Places. And I think we need to do all we could. We need to throw at it with all the capital, all the technology, all the mindset and determination that we have in order not to face that crisis, which will be unimaginable. What does the unchecked impact of climate change imply? It doesn't just imply, I might use more aircon. I can find cleaner energy. I can look at energy efficiency in order to do that. No, it means a lot of extreme floods. We've seen actually quite a bit of that. The melting of the Arctic ice belt, it will cause serious flooding all the way down for a lot of areas on the earth. And it could push additional 100 million people into extreme poverty by 2030 if this is unchecked, because a lot of the places could be uninhabitable, and a lot of the businesses could face such huge challenges that it could mean the end of business for some of them. So it would actually do a lot in terms of not the opposite of poverty alleviation, the opposite of what the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations have put out on an unchecked impact of climate change would really mean that there isn't too much healthy business and healthy places left on Earth. Now, in managing some of this risk, and we need to look at it from an organization and a business point of view, it is an environmental issue, but that has huge spillover negative impact on every business sector, every industry sector, and every professional. The Global Association of Risk Professionals recently did a survey that indicated that additional knowledge, on this, 85% agrees that is needed. And 15% of all the big corporations that responded to this, a lot of them are Fortune 500 companies, believe that their organization has a current strategy. Only 15%. Now, that is hugely not enough, of course, given the magnitude that I just showed you in the 2 slides before. Now, 95% of them say they are developing a strategic plan to climate risk. I really hope that that plan can be developed faster. And I think the knowledge gap that need to be filled from the leaders downwards to the mid-level managers, to the entry level, to even the students. I think the knowledge gap exists across very broadly across all different hierarchies of the organization. And that is something that is really pertinent. If you look at it, 85% believe that the knowledge is essential for the future in managing their risk, their business risk. But only 15% believe they have a current strategy. I think those set of numbers speaks a lot, speaks loudly of the crisis that we are currently in. Now, what are some of the major risks that actually this poses? You might wonder, okay, so natural disasters, hurricanes and typhoons of the magnitude that we have never seen before, flooding and bushfire of a magnitude that we have never witnessed. But what exactly are the different types of risk on the impact of business, on the impact of the capital owner's assets, as well as some of the expenses in managing the businesses? Firstly, there are, of course, physical risk. There was a huge typhoon in Hong Kong a couple of years ago that actually took out all the windows in a grade A, commercial building on the Kowloon side. And the joke is that those companies that were located in those floors, they went paperless immediately. But that's really not a joke. You have all the paper files, everything some flying out of the window. We've seen hurricanes in the US, Florida and some of the southern states. The hurricanes are really at a magnitude that we have never seen before either. So there are huge physical risk on the company's assets and the surrounding infrastructures and on their key stakeholders. There are, of course, human risks as well. When certain places become so disaster prone, so, when disasters can happen so frequently, then there could be mass migration due to such adverse living conditions. And that has a huge impact on businesses. Transition risk, the shifts in environmental policy associated will change consumer preferences. We are already seeing that investors and consumers are voting. Okay, particularly if you look at the younger generation who are poised to take over from, the wealth transfer from their parents, or the current generation, the now gen. The next gen thinks probably differently from the now gen. They witness all these risks very much firsthand. They are digital natives. They believe in the power of capital and tech to try to address some of these issues and to invest really in nature. So, a lot of these shifts would actually mean that businesses can no longer afford not to manage this risk, but also to look at the opportunities in which investing in some of these solutions can bring, in which the power of their capital, the power of their, consumer purchasing power can actually make a difference and help as part of the mitigation. So the three types of risk speaks for themselves again, loud and clear. Now, what are some of the opportunities? We spoke a lot on the risk, okay? And I certainly don't want to be, the doomsday person, just spelling out, a picture of gloom and doom. Sure, there are huge risks and huge urgency relating to addressing this risk with all the capital, with all the resources, and with all the technology that we have. And we are not exactly moving fast enough either. But look at the new opportunities that this would bring as well. Okay, this would bring new customer behaviors that would drive them towards companies that are more, sustainable focused. In terms of simple things like packaging. The plastic waste that ensues, that comes with packaging. I think a lot of consumers are voting with their purchasing. Hey, I don't like the way in which this packaging goes. I'm not sure that this company is really serious about looking after the earth while they make a profit. So all these are powerful shifts and creating new opportunities in which companies need to look at not just decarbonization, not just buying carbon credits, but also looking at the whole way in which how sustainable are the different aspects, are the processes and the operational angles that your business is being formed. There will be product innovation. We have already seen quite a bit. There are companies that looks at and develop products around from waste to energy. So using the plastic waste or other waste to transfer that to energy so that we are less dependent on fossil fuel, which of course is causing a lot of the carbon emission problems. There will be new business models. COVID, the global pandemic, have exposed that face-to-face interactions, a lot of the physical purchasing, from groceries to food, to cosmetics, to everything. So e-commerce have really taken off. Virtual meetings and virtual events have really taken off, driven and really pushed by the global pandemic when, the former normal is no longer possible. But all these would also mean that there are new business models for, even traditional businesses to look at. If you look at the number of open banking, solution providers, if you look at the number of digital banks that don't have a brick and mortar branch, all these are new business models that, are springing up, to address some of these issues that we talk about. There's also the mitigation of costs. Everybody would know that a virtual event is probably less costly to put out than a face-to-face event. Everybody would know that there are huge savings in terms of digitizing a lot of their offerings. It doesn't mean just one sector, whether you're in the finance sector, in the FMCG sector, in the fashion sector, in the supply chain sector. There are huge cost mitigation that these new business models and product innovation can bring about that can help to mitigate a lot of the climate risk. So climate risk, while it's a very urgent and really sad, issue for a lot of the tragic disasters that we have witnessed, and I don't need to go into detail on that. There are also opportunities. It's really that we must see them as opportunities. Leadership must look at it through a slightly different lens, the E, S, and G, the environmental, social, and governance lenses, in really going about their operational processes as well as their investments. Now, we are also very pleased to see that the regulators have been providing a lot of tailwind behind this. By tailwind, I'm not saying that the corporates or the other sectors are not aware of this, but of course the regulators as a government force, as a public sector force, has a huge role to play in terms of the disclosure requirements, in terms of the framework, and also in terms of the way in which they regulate the different industry sectors. I think that really helps also to provide a lot of impetus for people to rally around a common framework, which is badly needed, to rally around a common objective and goalposts to move forward. So this is just to share with you a little bit on the TCFD. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. The TCFD is a task force on climate-related financial disclosures. So this is actually formed through that task force, which is part of the European Union, the EU, and they have recently put out a taxonomy on sustainable finance, because given the E, S, and G are fairly complex and very broad in terms of what are the thematic verticals they embrace, and what are some of the issues that each of the verticals can tackle. So it's very good that apart from that taxonomy, which I understand also that Singapore is also working on it, and I have to commend the Singapore as a nation, that you're really at the forefront of driving this. The Singapore Green Plan of 2030 is very much, taking all that regulatory environment globally and really adapting it to a locally relevant and a regionally relevant plan for Singapore and Singapore's neighbors. So the TCFD actually does four things. They focus on four primary areas. Okay, first is governance, second is strategy, and also the financial planning, the operating processes and the financial planning of businesses. Thirdly is risk and the risk management. And last but not least is metrics and targets. Now, all these are current pain points, if you like. When you look at climate risk or ESG, governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics are pain points. But the TCFD is definitely working in the right direction on this, and I'm sure that there are other countries that are moving along as well. Singapore Green Plan 2030 being a very exemplary initiative in this regard. Apart from climate, there are also other, like biodiversity, that is related to this, the water and waste management of a country or of a city. So there's also a TCND, which is the Task Force on Nature-based Biodiversity Disclosures. I won't go into detail on that, but all these are very much regulatory forces that form part of the market drivers, that whether you are in the finance industry, in the corporate sector, as a CEO, in the C-suite, or as a board member, you really can't afford to ignore. You really need to look at how you are going to embrace and include and embed some of these into your business model. Now, I will end on this, which is a bit of a nightmare slide, I know, but happy to share that with people if they want to. This is really a look at climate finance between 2017 and 2018 from the Climate Policy Initiative, looking at the different ways in which the finance sector, the capital markets, can deploy. There could be financing, there could be credit. So there are a lot of green financing that banks make use of their balance sheet in order to fund some of these projects. There are also, lending, bond, fixed income products that are looking at not just climate, but other aspects as well, including nature-based solutions. But there are also equity-based, offerings and private equity, direct investments, and all that. So, I think capital markets as a whole, with all the different asset classes that appeals to different risk appetites of investors, whether they be institutional investors or private investors, really has a very pivotal role to play in terms of driving this agenda and solving some of these risks that we talk about, earlier on. And if you look at some of the the funding gaps that the United Nations said about the SDG, the analysis showed that an additional 1.5 to 2 trillion dollars US dollars is needed per year to transition to a low carbon resilient world that we need to be in. That sounds like a tall order, but I think we can definitely move towards that. It needs a lot of collective action. It needs also a kind of mindset shift. It needs a recognition of where are the gaps that we need to plug. It needs a recognition from the leaders cascading through the different, hierarchies within the organization and across different sectors, what they need to do as a business, as an individual. And we really need to look at this, I believe, from intersectional lens. What do I mean by that? The problems are far too big for any single sector, whether it be government, it be the finance sector, it be the listed companies or the big corporates or the startups that are very innovative in hammering out solutions in this regard. The problems are too urgent and too big for any single sector to tackle on their own. So you need an intersectional lens in order to do that. And that is really something that we are working on, whether it be on the learning side and on other advocacy initiatives. That intersectional lens, I believe it's something that we will need in order to avoid sleepwalking into this crisis that we can ill afford. I'd just like to end. I'm happy to take questions and happy to see what other perspectives Carrie or others might have. But I'd just like to end, saying there is somebody much more eloquent than myself. Shall remain nameless for now. Said, when being asked about how would that impact my business, said there is no business to be had, no profit to be made on a dead planet. We need to invest in nature before nature takes us all out. And we have a very narrow time frame. We're probably the first generation collectively, whether you are a millennial or a Gen X or a baby boomer, we are the first generation alive right now that are painfully aware of the crisis. But probably the last generation that can realistically do something about it before it's too late. So on that, let me just pass it back to Carrie and see if there are questions from the audience or see if there are other, um, you know, um, uh, perspectives that we could help with.
Thank you, Helene. Back to me again. Yeah, the crux of what you've just presented is kind of in your face. The situation is definitely very dire, if you ask me. Maybe I should uh, ask you the first question. I take the first salvo. The saving grace is that by averting catastrophic levels of planetary warming, uh, leaders of most businesses are already doing things with an obligation as well as an opportunity. For those companies or organizations that have not set out on this journey, what should they do? Where do they start?
That's actually a very interesting question. Thank you for that, Carrie. I think that it depends on which industry sector they're in and all that. It could vary. So there's really no one size fits all. But I really believe that there are twofold. There are two things that are key. First, you've got to have a strategy that suits your business. Okay, it's not just like, oh, let's reduce the aircon in a property that we manage. Let's put in more sensors in order to find out how much energy we can save or to migrate to a more efficient way of using energy. It's having that strategy that you can communicate loud and clear to your customers, to your employees, internally and externally, and to the society at large. So part of it is having that strategy that absolutely makes sense for your business and makes sense for the savings in your operational, processes, but communicating that. People need to be aware that you are doing that. So the communication side, the strategy side, I would say are the building blocks, Carrie, and you can build on it depending on what exactly is your business model and other things that you are looking at.
Thank you. Also, you did mention a little earlier on about fossil fuel.
Mm.
Given that the renewable sources provide only a small percentage of our energy and that nuclear power is way too expensive, what can we realistically do to get off fossil fuels as soon as possible?
I think it's a very tough question. There are no easy answers to that. As we are, it's sort of like weaning of a bad habit that we know is causing us damage. You can't wean it, completely. I think it's a transition process. I think there are lots of scientists that are working hard in terms of what are the alternative energy, clean energy. The migration is definitely taking place. And I know that there are also fund managers, for instance, that are making efforts to try to reduce any investments into fossil fuel sector and all that. So I think all these collective efforts hopefully would put us on that. But coupling with that is also the energy efficiency side. Because while we are weaning, while we cannot completely get rid of so quote unquote dirty to clean energy, we can look at using less energy. Okay, how do we actually have a more efficient way to use less energy? And I don't mean just closing the light or switching off your laptop when you leave the office, or or don't print paper. I think we're all doing that. But I think there are very realistic ways, particularly if you look at the property real estate sector. One single commercial building, the real estate sector actually, I think, accounts for something like 40% of the carbon emissions. So there are ways in which they need to look at it. So don't just blame the airlines. The airlines are not as much when it comes to it, because the real estate, a piece of property, you need to keep that operational 24/7 almost, and 365 days. So there is so much that prop tech and the energy transition and all that can do. So it's a journey. It's not just about transitioning to clean energy. It's also about energy efficiency.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned earlier about business and investment agenda.
Mm,
And we
mm.
also talk about bridging this learning agenda. Now, how does the SMU Go Impact certificate in in investments as well as megatrends in sustainability help to address this? What does it cover?
Right. I think it's very interesting. I think there are very few people that would disagree. There is a bit of a learning gap that exists in terms of this, and that is important because the better informed the investors, the better informed the executives, the better able they are to take this forward. So I think the way in which SMU and Go Impact have partnered is that we make use of a lot of industry knowledge. Okay, so we have a lot of cases that are from the ground up. They are expert-led and case-based, so that you actually hear directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak, metaphorically, what has been done, what can be done, what are some of the mistakes that they might have made along the journey, and what are the lessons learned. So I think that is a very practical, instead of theoretical, and with a lot of industry cases that really helps people to bring this to life and to take it back to their work. So I think SMU it's outstanding in that. We're very glad to be, partnering on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Helene. Any questions from the floor, please? We've got 50 attendees here with us today, so maybe anything from you guys? The Q&A, hang on a second. I don't see anything. Okay, got it. Just let me read the questions. Okay, Helene, are our current ESG reporting strategies satisfying the needs of the investment community and other stakeholders?
That's a great question. Actually, it's the answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that progress has been made, but no, in the sense that as an investor, you probably need something a little bit more in order to make some of those investment decisions. When a family office invests in a green bond, they like to have a fairly well-defined set of metrics into how green it is, and in terms of how that has, how their investment have actually contributed to greening the underlying and all that. So in that respect, I think there are a lot of progress that I want to highlight as well. For instance, IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards, which is like, if you do an audit, the chances are that you need to comply by the IFRS accounting standards. So the IFRS has earlier this year put out a consultation to the industry, to which Go Impact has responded as well. They are looking at a Sustainability Standards Board, an SSB, really to look at, from a financial reporting point of view, what are some of the common metrics, what are some of the underlying framework that can be put together, that people can have a kind of consistency. So I think that is very much a welcomed initiative. And I think for IFRS to take that, I think it definitely makes sense for the investors as well. After all, it's a trust issue. For investors to deploy more capital, they need to trust that, the greenwashing or whatever, and there's a term called rainbow washing, because the 17 SDGs have different colors. So whether it's greenwashing, rainbow washing, people want to shy away and want to make sure that it doesn't happen to their investments. So I think what the IFRS doing is definitely very good, and I'm sure that in the next couple of years we will see leaps and bounds development in that, hopefully.
Thank you, Helene. I hope that answers your question. Next question: what are your thoughts about the increase in ESG standards globally? Is it in the right direction or can it be improved?
ESG standards or
Yeah,
ESG, okay.
this is increasing ESG standards.
Okay. ESG standards, if we just talk about it, IFRS and people like that are still working out the Sustainability Standards Board. It's definitely it's definitely a pain point that everybody, whether investors to other practitioners, are looking at. I'm not quite sure I answer that question, but I'm not quite sure either what ESG standards are they referring to.
Specific.
Yeah. So, but it's definitely a move in the right direction.
Okay,
You can expect definitely more standardization and more consistency around that. And definitely the investors and the finance sector needs that very badly.
thank you. Okay, next question. Is climate risk an actual financial risk?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I touch upon that in one of our earlier slides. There are three different risks. There's a human risk, there's the transitional risk, and there's the physical risk. Okay, so climate risk is not just about hurricanes. It's not just about news that we read on the TV. Okay, that doesn't happen to us. It can very well happen to any of us, to any location. And with that comes a lot of physical risk, but also human risk in terms of people, moving away from countries or cities that have become less inhabitable because of that. And all that is happening quite fast. So climate risk is absolutely a business risk that impacts, different sectors.
Okay, thank you, Helene. Couple more questions. How
Sure.
can we better engage young people, for example, students or youth activists, to combat climate change?
I think the young people are very motivated. You have got the Greta Thunbergs of this world, speaking all the way to the UN and to World Economic Forum. You've got a lot of really the millennials and the Gen Z, are really vocal about it, and they really believe, in solving this issue. So I think in terms of intention um, and understanding, the younger people have no lack of that. Okay, it's more equipping them maybe with some, with more knowledge of how they can help, and also, making sure that whichever sector they go into working for, their jobs and so on, the corporate sector, the finance sector, and other sectors, all these would have real meanings to engage young people in terms of that. And I think for the students, whether you're a university or secondary students, I'm sure there'll be more courses on this coming up very shortly. For now, we are tackling more the executive and the investor education, but definitely, the student education is very much the next tier, if you like. Yeah.
Thank you, Helene. Does ESG criteria help frame the strategy's investment universe?
Yes, it does. If you look at some of the ESG funds that are currently, they actually perform quite well, both in the fixed income space and in the equity space. If you look at the S&P 500 index in 2020, at least, until about a month or so ago, when I was looking at it and comparing that with S&P ESG. Okay, so if you look at the S&P 500, which is the traditional companies, versus the S&P ESG that has applied the filter of ESG onto the companies, actually there's a difference of about 4.5%. The ESG one outperforms the traditional one without the ESG lens. So ESG actually serves two things in terms of investments. First, is a risk mitigator. Okay, it helps you mitigate certain risk that you may not be factoring if you didn't apply that lens in your investment. And secondly, it's also an alpha generator, because if the companies that do well in terms of sustainable development would have a better chance to perform better financially in the midterm. So that definitely plays well for investors to select that into their portfolio. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, how ingrained should ESG principles be in the company's operations?
Um, you are speaking to a converted, so I would say you need to be very ingrained. But I'm also pragmatic enough to realize that embedding this into your company's strategy and company's operating processes is a journey. Okay. It's not like, okay, we all realize we need to look at this, but can I do it like, next month, within, next quarter? Maybe part of it, not all of it. So we need to have a pragmatic approach in terms of embedding this as well, so that, you need to find the points of least resistance, and to push ahead that way. Lessons hard learned in my finance career, Carrie.
Yeah, I'm sure you need lots of buy-in to start off with.
Absolutely. So you need to find those points of least resistance and also find champions that can work together with you to make sure that this cascades to the organization. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of change management initiative there as well, for sure.
Yep. Definitely.
Okay. Financing a green agenda is also a commercial imperative, but specialized skills are needed to protect balance sheets. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Balance sheet, making a profit, it's the survival game of a business. I won't go so far as to say Adam Smith, and say that the business of a business is business. Yes, but the business of the business also means taking into account different stakeholders' interest, and not just the shareholders' interest.
Mhm.
So because if in the midterm, and again, it's taking a slightly more midterm view instead of a quarter to quarter view, probably. And I know that's tough. Okay, I've spent most of my life in working with companies at senior level that really are judged, on the quarterly results, and there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of that, and don't get me wrong, so it's managing that balance sheet and delivering profitability uh, is the end game of a business. But you also need to realize that you are not doing it damaging other things. You're not doing it sacrificing the midterm return or bringing along crisis that you can't manage in about 3 years' time. You may not be the CEO in 3 years' time, but somebody will be, and your company will be there. So whoever steps into the shoes of the CEO would have a very tough song and dance to face in the midterm. So it's really about, taking a slightly midterm view, but also looking at more broadly managing the stakeholders, just only focusing on shareholders and doing things that are not just benefiting you in the next quarter, whereas damaging you probably in 3 years, 2 years, whatever. So absolutely, looking at the balance sheet is very important and critical. There are skill sets, definitely. I think there are a lot of people in the sustainable finance side. Most of the financial institutions are looking at it in a very serious manner, and for corporates as well. So yeah.
Yep. So we got to strike a fine balance between the two. All right.
Yes.
Helen, I seem to have lost. Helen, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, okay, your screen is off. Okay, I've got one a very specific question from a gentleman called Abdul Rashid Kareem.
Mm.
He's actually a ship manager and operator, and they have a unique vessel that can do desalination of water and produce drinkable bottled water. Basically, the aim of this initiative is to mitigate the impending water scarcity. Uh, they are looking to upscale and conduct deeper research on deep sea water. So he would like to understand the network and channels in Asia that can be a step forward to integrate a sustainable water alternative idea to the conventional water industry. So I'm not too sure if this is a question that you'll be able to answer.
That is actually a great question.
Really?
Water scarcity
Yeah.
is an area that, because we are talking about climate risk today, Carrie,
Mm.
mainly.
Yeah.
So we haven't touched on that. We've got a lot of information on water scarcity and the biodiversity risk that it will pose because of the water scarcity. And actually, it's an investment area as well. I've noticed that there are certain funds that focus on water that have done
Mm.
very well. Okay, I would not name names and all that, but it's an investment area definitely. So if you have an idea at the proof of concept, a POC stage, for desalination, and thereby really at improving that issue of water scarcity. I'm sure that there are people in Europe. I don't know of too many people in Asia. Pardon my ignorance. I know investors into that water area, but there are a lot of scientists, based in Europe and the Nordic countries that are working on that. So, if you hit me up on my DM, I'm happy to connect you and be the connector if that helps. So, you got a very valid point there, and it's a huge issue for which maybe some of the upcoming courses with SMU will be tackling that. The biodiversity and that whole it's a very real problem. In addition to the climate risk. So thank you for that. Happy to connect, and if that helps.
Thank you, Abdul Karim. So there you go. Drop us an email. We'll be happy to connect you as well. So last question, the very, very practical question. What are the career opportunities for someone interested to work in climate risk related work?
Huge, huge. Okay. By
Yeah.
huge, I mean, don't just look at it very narrowly as climate risk related. You are looking at it from a sustainability lens. Okay. If I look at the jobs, that are being posted right now, there are two types of roles that institutions find it hard to fill. First is, of course, data scientists, developers, and all that. But secondly, it's the sustainability related roles. Those are very hard to fill, particularly experienced people with the knowledge and the expertise. So definitely there are huge career opportunities. But before those career opportunities, the first thing is to equip yourself with the knowledge, right? If you are better equipped with the knowledge and with certificates and all that, you are better able to enhance your employability. So there's definitely huge demand for that.
Okay, thank you. We just ended on time. We've just shy of 2 minutes left. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, SIT, for this opportunity to do this presentation. We'll be happy to connect Helene and myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Hanin Lee and Mr. Kerry Chan, for the great sharing insights. We have come to the end of this session. Thank you all for attending. We would love to hear some of your feedbacks. We will be provided with a survey right after this session, and do give us your valuable feedbacks. Thank you once again for joining us, and continue to enjoy the rest of the sessions today.